Hannah! Mark! What happened?
When I got back from work, an astonishing scene unfolded before me. My daughter Hannah and my husband Mark were lying on the living room floor. Rushing over, I realized neither of them was breathing. Nearby, a rope and what appeared to be a suicide note were carelessly placed. With trembling hands, I picked up the note. The content I read made my head go blank. What in the world? Mark, taking Hannah's life. Then, unable to believe reality, I went through the motions of arranging their funerals. The police had quickly closed the case, assuming the note explained it all. Essentially, they concluded it was a murder-suicide. But that made no sense. Mark would never do such a thing. As I stood there in shock, a person came to visit. And then, an unexpected truth came to light. I immediately told the police, persistently asking them to reinvestigate. Eventually, the police, reluctantly, reopened the case. They came to my house later on. "We're sorry. It wasn't a murder-suicide," one of the officers said hesitantly. The two were. The facts that were revealed next filled me with disbelief. My name is Amy Smith. I'm turning 50 this year. I'm a working mom, holding a part-time job at a small local company. My husband Mark is 52, 2 years my senior. He works in the HR department of a small to medium-sized company, where he's a manager. We have one child, our 11-year-old daughter Hannah, in 5th grade. But Hannah isn't our biological child. She's adopted. Mark and I got married in our 20s, but we couldn't have children. We went through fertility treatments for a long time. But it was too much for my body, and we gave up before I turned 40. Instead, we decided to adopt. And that's how we got Hannah. Hannah grew up healthy, kind, and honest. Whether she's our biological child doesn't matter. We cherish her more than anything. Our family is no different from any other. In fact, our bond is even stronger. That such a horrifying incident could happen to us. I didn't want to believe it. No, I still can't believe it. But it did happen. "Mom, I'm home." Hannah would always come home in the evening, greeting me with her bright voice. Behind her, Hannah has been getting along with her classmates who are now close friends.
Hello there. Hi. Welcome.
It's Jake and Mia. Jake is a mischievous boy who's good at video games, and Mia is a diligent honor girl. Somehow they hit it off, and lately, the three of us have been hanging out more. They've gone straight into Hannah's room to enjoy some games together. You can hear their cheerful voices, and it's heartwarming. I'm in the kitchen, preparing snacks for the three of them. It's a pound cake from a bakery downtown, quite affordable. I wondered for a moment if it was too cheap, but then I thought better of it. No need to put on airs. Turns out, the school Hannah goes to has a lot of wealthy families. Due to several top-notch local businesses in the area, it naturally became a gathering place for company CEOs and the like. We got a piece of land from a relative of Mike's at a bargain and just happened to build our house there. We're not particularly wealthy. So, this was unexpected. At school events like parent-teacher meetings, many parents show up in flashy clothes, sporting high-end brands. I felt a bit out of place, a bit uncomfortable with the atmosphere. Me, with no brands to speak of, felt out of place, and conversations at parent meetings about overseas trips and fancy restaurants were all the rage. I clearly remember feeling somewhat uneasy. Therefore, it's inevitable that their kids also wear nice clothes and have developed tastes. Thinking about it, I felt hesitant to serve Hannah's friends snacks that were obviously cheap. But, there's really no need to serve fancy treats to kids. It's not good for Hannah to get used to luxuries from such a young age. I decided to cheer up, knocked on Karen's room, and went inside.
Today's snack is pound cake. Enjoy, everyone.
Cheers from the kids.
Lucky. Thanks, ma'am. Thank you.
Jake's eyes sparkle with excitement, and Mia thanks me sweetly. Mom, thank you, Hannah smiled. Regardless of adults' conveniences, children are innocent. I thought so, but then Jake said something unexpected.
Hey auntie, this is the cheapest pound cake from the store in front of the station, right? It costs like $2? Wow, you know your stuff, Jake. But even though it's cheap, it's really tasty.
I felt a flutter of panic inside as the child saw right through me.
If it's that store, the $5 cheesecake is the best. Expensive stuff tastes better, right? Is your family, Hannah's family, having financial troubles?
Faced with Jake's blunt questioning, Hannah and I were at a loss for words. I wonder if he talks like this at home too. As I pondered how to respond, Mia came to our rescue.
That's not nice, Jake. It's rude to talk about prices like that. Whatever. By the way, the other day we ordered a cake made by this famous pastry chef, and it was so good.
Jake started boasting carelessly. I was taken aback by his attitude, but Hannah and Mia seemed impressed, nodding along with his story. Well, it's probably just that age when they want to brag about stuff. As the kids got more excited, I decided to leave Hannah's room. That night, Mark came home. As we all gathered around the dinner table, Hannah was chatting away as usual.
We played games today. I beat Mia but couldn't beat Jake. He's good at games. And he knows a lot about stuff, a real foodie too.
Is that so? I nodded along nonchalantly. Remembering the day's events made me feel a bit conflicted, but Hannah didn't seem bothered, so I guessed it was okay. Still, I hadn't expected Jake to suddenly start talking about prices. I remembered that Jake's family is quite well off. I recall seeing Jake's mother at a school event, dressed in expensive clothes, looking down on me. They must be used to only the best, not giving a second thought to cheap pound cakes. Cheap pound cakes are probably beneath their notice. Unaware of all this, Mark just smiled happily.
It's great you have good friends. Yeah, ever since I joined this class, every day's been so much fun.
Just a normal, peaceful time. I was being naive. I never imagined that such ordinary days would suddenly crumble away. The sense of discomfort came quickly. Lately, Hannah seemed a bit off. I wondered if something happened at school. Maybe a fight with friends or trouble with studies. She's been eating less dinner lately and spending more time in her room. This day too, she went straight to her room as soon as she got back. Usually, she'd come into the kitchen saying, "I'm so hungry," and talk brightly about her day at school. Worried, I bought Hannah's favorite muffins on my way home from work. I thought we could eat them together and I could listen to her troubles.
Hannah, snacks are ready.
Imagining Hannah's happy face, I opened the door without knocking.
Wait, don't come in.
Hannah cried out in panic, and something fell from her hand.
Sorry. What's this?
I picked it up. Then, Hannah turned pale as a ghost. It was a pregnancy test. The positive line was clearly visible.
What's this? What is it?
I couldn't believe what I saw and my voice trembled. It's... Hannah stopped speaking and remained silent. No matter how much I pressed, got angry, or whatever I did, Hannah wouldn't speak. She only nodded when I asked if the test was hers. So, Hannah was pregnant. I couldn't believe it. Sure, Hannah had started her periods this year. But she's still a child. I've heard that some precocious kids already have boyfriends, but Hannah wasn't like that. She wouldn't say who the other person was. Could it have been forced on her? The thought made my skin crawl. What kind of person would do such a thing to a child? I persisted until the last minute, hoping Hannah would talk, but it was no use. Finally, Hannah broke down crying. At that point, there was nothing more I could do. I proceeded to prepare the dinner I had abandoned and took care of Mark when he came home. The dinner table, usually lively, was quieter than it had ever been. Hannah hardly ate and quickly said, "I'm going to bed," before retreating to her room again.
Hannah, wait. We're not done talking.
Calling her back was futile. She wouldn't say a word. Eventually, Mark sensed something was wrong and asked, "What happened? Both of you were so quiet at dinner. Did you have a fight?" At Mark's words, I let out a deep sigh. The truth is, I decided to confide in Mark. This was too big for me to handle alone. Mark was shocked when he heard,
"No way! Are you sure it's not a mistake?"
"But I saw it with my own eyes. And Hannah herself said, it's mine." Mark grimaced and exclaimed,
"But Hannah is still a grade schooler. Who could she have?"
I mentioned something that crossed my mind.
"Remember, there was an email about a creep hanging around near the school, warning us to be careful. I don't want to think about it, but maybe. It's possible. Maybe she was approached by a creep on her way home."
Mark nodded.
"Right. That's why she can't talk about it. But if she really is pregnant, this is serious. We need to take her to an OBGYN. Yeah. And I'll try to talk to Hannah too. Depending on how things go, we might have to go to the police."
The word police made me dizzy. This has turned into an unbelievable situation. But we need to catch the perpetrator quickly. I can't forgive someone who would do this to a grade schooler. We must act immediately. Fortunately, tomorrow is Saturday, and everyone is off. I'll persuade Hannah to go to the hospital and the police. We were determined to do this. The next day, after breakfast, I was about to talk to Hannah when my phone rang.
"Hello? What?"
It was my boss calling. Apparently, there was a problem, and he asked if I could come into work. There are only 5 of us at work, the boss and his wife, 1 full-time supervisor, and 2 part-timers, including me. Normally, part-timers don't work on weekends, but they needed help for a few hours due to a shortage of staff. But I was hesitant, but they said it would be over by noon, so I reluctantly agreed. I explained the situation to Mark and told him I was going to work. Mark understood and said, "While you're gone, I'll try to talk to Hannah." I was worried. The work was supposed to be a correction of a ordering mistake and end by noon, but it went until 3 p.m. I wondered if Mark and Hannah were waiting for me, tired. I rushed home, saying I'm back, but no one replied. Feeling suspicious, I entered the living room. Then, I was faced with a shocking scene. Hannah and Mark were lying face down.
"Hannah! Mark! What happened?"
I rushed over, but both were lifeless. Nearby, there was a rope and a paper that looked like a suicide note. The note read, "I'm sorry. I was the one who violated Hannah. I don't expect to be forgiven. I'm taking responsibility and leaving this world with Hannah." My mind went blank reading it. What does this mean? Mark was the one who got Hannah pregnant. And to take matters into his own hands. I shakily dialed 911 for an ambulance and the police. Indeed, both were dead. Standing was all I could manage, overwhelmed by the events. This is a nightmare. It doesn't feel like it's happening in reality. Amid my confusion, the police proceeded with their work emotionlessly. A scene investigation was conducted immediately, and I was taken to the police station for questioning. There, I had to talk about things I could hardly bear to say. That Hannah wasn't my biological daughter, that she was pregnant, and that we were planning to go to the hospital and the police. After being detained for a long time and talking non-stop, I was naturally exhausted. I was still in shock and my mind was foggy. It was then. The detective facing me, an older man, looked at me with sympathetic eyes.
"Your husband must have been panicked. Going to the hospital would mean tests, and then it would come out that he had a relationship with your daughter."
At those words, I fired back, heatedly.
"My husband is not like that. It's some kind of mistake." "Ma'am, I don't want to say this, but these kinds of incidents are surprisingly common. She's not your biological child, right? It's possible that the adoption was with that intent from the start."
I was shocked by the detective's insinuation.
That's awful. How can you say such a thing? Both my husband and I have cared for Hannah dearly. It's unthinkable that he would adopt her with such vile intentions.
As I said this, the detective's expression grew even more pitying.
Well, you'd want to believe that, but men can have sides to them they don't show their wives.
Mark wasn't that kind of person. I wanted to say so, but my mouth just opened and closed. Fatigue and anger had reached their limits, and I could no longer speak. It seemed that from the content of that suicide note, they had concluded it was a murder-suicide. Despite it being unthinkable. No matter how much I protested, the police wouldn't listen. Because of this, no further investigation was conducted. Eventually, Hannah and Mark's funeral took place. Even as I went through the motions, I still couldn't believe it. It felt like this was all just a bad dream. My mind was constantly foggy, as if covered in a haze, but with my parents' help, we managed to get through the funeral. Hannah's school friends, especially Mia and Jake, who were close to her, had come. Mark's friends and colleagues were there too. Everyone was overwhelmed with grief. But, given the nature of their deaths, it was undeniable that they were treated like a sensitive subject. Despite not wanting to hear it, I caught snippets of murmurs from the mourners.
That husband, seems he could only love little kids. And then with a child not related by blood. What a terrible incident.
I wanted to scream out that it was all wrong. Why did it come to this? There's no way Mark could have done such a thing. Something must be terribly wrong. But I was powerless to do anything. I've been unable to sleep or eat for days on end. I've become completely emaciated. My life had been so ordinary up until now, why did it come to this? I couldn't muster the energy to do anything as time just passed by. Then, one day, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, it was Mia and her mother. It was the first time I'd seen Mia since the funeral. Her face was even more swollen from crying than before.
Auntie, Thank you for coming, Mia.
I forced a smile on my tired face and led them to the room.
I wanted to play more with Hannah. Play games together, study together. I miss you, Hannah.
Hearing Mia's pure voice, I too felt tears threatening to spill over. But then, something changed. Mia began to sob more and more violently.
I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. It's my fault.
What do you mean? How is it your fault, Mia?
Silently, Mia's mother spoke up.
Actually, there's something Mia told me.
And then, she shared a shocking truth.
So, that's what happened. Thank you for telling me, Mia.
After hearing the story, I was stunned. This fact should be reported to the police, Mia's mother said firmly. But I looked down.
But, it seems like they've already processed it as a murder-suicide.
Then, Mia's mother said something unexpected.
I have a relative in the police force. I'll talk to them and see if they can somehow get it reinvestigated. Auntie, please ask them on my behalf too. It's just too sad for Hannah and your uncle if it ends like this.
Mia pleaded with tears in her eyes. Their words moved my weary heart just a bit. Okay. I want to uncover what happened to Hannah and Mark. Since Mia and her family are willing to help, I must gather my strength and do everything I can. A few days later, I was at the police station to talk about the facts Mia's family had shared. I succinctly relayed the information to the older detective I had spoken with before.
That's why I don't think it was a murder-suicide. Please, reinvestigate, I pleaded.
However, the detective frowned.
We can't just reopen the case like that. The investigation concluded as per your husband's suicide note, he said, sounding irritated.
I pleaded with the detective, who looked annoyed.
Please, I'm begging you.
I persisted, but his response didn't change. He even started saying things like we're busy with other cases. Left with no choice, I mentioned the name of the police relative Mia's mother had told me about. I've spoken to them, I said, and the detective suddenly turned pale.
Excuse me a moment.
He left and then returned a while later with someone who appeared to be his supervisor. Suddenly, his tone changed to polite, and he said, "We will reinvestigate." I was surprised. Mia's mother's police relative must be quite influential. Regardless, I was grateful. I breathed a sigh of relief. Then, the situation took a significant turn. Later on, 2 police officers came to my house. Their demeanor was different from before, almost apologetic. As I led them to the living room, they suddenly apologized.
We are sorry. We had been pursuing the investigation under the assumption of a murder-suicide, but it wasn't that.
Just as I thought,
I murmured. One of the officers, with a solemn face, informed me.
The 2 were taken from us by a third party.
The police, having conducted a reinvestigation, checked everything. They took fingerprints in the house again, reviewed belongings and security camera footage, and conducted interviews in the vicinity. As a result, they saw a car belonging to the true perpetrator on a security camera near our home. It was Jake's parents, Riley and Silas Ellington. They were the ones who had taken the lives of Hannah and Mark. In fact, Jake was the one who had impregnated Hannah. The confession I heard from Mia that day went back several months. Curious and knowledgeable, Jake, influenced by adult movies and comics, had awakened sexually. Out of curiosity, he had suggested to Mia, "Let's play an adult game." Mia, lacking knowledge, didn't quite understand what the act entailed. But she intuitively felt something ominous and declined. Feeling it was wrong to spread such stories, she kept it to herself. Since then, Jake had stopped trying to involve Mia. And then, he had turned his attention to Hannah. According to Mia, Hannah didn't seem to have much knowledge about sex either. From my perspective, Hannah was innocent and didn't seem interested in such matters.
Hannah was so kind, she couldn't refuse Jake. She probably didn't understand what it would entail. If only I had told her to refuse Jake's requests. Then none of this would have happened. It's my fault,
Mia said, crying. She seemed to regret not having warned her. While this was happening, the situation took the worst possible turn. The 2 had passed away. Mia, attending the funeral, was shocked to learn that Mark was suspected and felt it couldn't be left as is. She bravely opened up to her mother. And then, Mia's mother brought her to me, knowing everything.
It was Jake who impregnated Hannah, not your husband. There was no reason for him to commit suicide. Maybe. It's difficult to say this, but perhaps, to silence them, someone related to Jake took their lives.
Mia's mother seemed reluctant to speak. But her horrific suspicion turned out to be accurate. Jake's parents, Riley and Silas, had devised a plan. This began when they learned of Hannah's pregnancy. Confused by her changing body, Hannah must have confided in Jake. Naturally, Jake's parents were informed. Riley and Silas panicked. Jake's family was prestigious, filled with socially high-standing elites. A sexual scandal involving their child, still a grade schooler, was absolutely forbidden. So, the 2 decided to take Hannah's life before the situation could escalate. They probably had concocted a story that she had been harassed by a pervert and died as a result. Initially, it seems they intended to lure Hannah alone somewhere. Likely, Hannah, having been called out for some reason, was supposed to leave by herself. That happened on a Saturday morning, after I had gone to work. But Mark must have confronted Hannah, who then told him the truth. Together, they visited Jake's home. However, this was unexpected for Riley and Silas. It seems they had told her to come alone, without her parents knowing, so having Mark come along threw their plan off. In a panic, Riley and Silas changed their plan. They decided to take the lives of both Hannah and Mark, making it look like a murder-suicide. Afterwards, they carried the bodies back to our living room. Next to Hannah and Mark, they placed a rope and a suicide note. The note claimed that Mark had looked at Hannah with sexual intentions, impregnating her, and had no choice but to take their lives. To avoid handwriting identification, the suicide note was forged on a computer. And with meticulous planning, the two wore gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints in the house. Their plan was executed flawlessly. I had wondered why the police investigation was so sloppy, but there was a reason for that. It was due to the unique customs of this land. In an area populated by the wealthy and business owners, the police often sided with them. It was mutually beneficial for getting various conveniences. Thus, as someone who was neither wealthy nor a business owner, an outsider like me was at a disadvantage from the start. Spending time and effort on investigations for outsiders would yield no return, so it naturally led to a shoddy job. Even in a situation that clearly seemed like third-party involvement, the police hastily concluded it was a suicide based on the note, without proper investigation. This incident was on the verge of being buried in darkness. However, an unexpected savior appeared. Mia and her mother. The police relative mentioned by Mia's mother was likely not just any officer, but someone with a significant position within the police force. Otherwise, they would not have agreed to a reinvestigation. I later found out that the elderly detective assigned to my case was demoted, likely thanks to this influential police relative. Upon revisiting the investigation, they found Riley and Silas's car on a neighborhood security camera. Of course, that alone wasn't enough evidence. But testimonies from neighbors who saw a suspicious man and woman entering and leaving our house were also obtained. Based on these, a search warrant for Riley and Silas's home was issued. It's unclear if they anticipated this, but Jake's family had thoroughly cleaned their house. No fingerprints were found, but fortunately, fibers from the clothes Hannah wore that day were discovered at Jake's house. And footprints believed to be Mark's were also found at the entrance. These pieces of evidence led to the arrest of Jake's parents, Riley and Silas. Initially, the two tried to deceive, but when confronted with the evidence, they confessed. They admitted to killing Hannah and Mark to cover up the shocking scandal that Jake, a grade schooler, had impregnated Hannah. This cleared Mark of any suspicion. I was only slightly relieved. It was too cruel for Mark to have been made a victim and then be branded as a criminal on top of that. Afterward, this case became major news, causing a stir in the public eye. It was featured on TV and magazines as the darkness of a wealthy family, and apparently, photos of Jake's family were being spread on social media. I say apparently because I haven't actually seen it myself. Friends and acquaintances told me about it, but I've been avoiding filling my head with uncertain information from the internet. From now on, I must fight in the real world. That is, in court. As a bereaved family member, I decided to use the victim participation system and attend the courtroom. I absolutely had to say something to those people. Instead of spending my days feeling down, I wanted to fight back. On the day, as soon as I took my seat, Riley and Silas caught my eye immediately. Both were looking down, aged significantly. In that state, they didn't look like the glamorous wealthy at all. But more than that, I struggled to contain the anger and sorrow that kept welling up inside me. For the sake of these people's vanity, Hannah and Mark were made victims. I could never forgive them. Prompted by the judge, I gave my statement.
Hannah was not our biological child, but we raised her with love and care. Can you understand the grief of having her taken away suddenly for such an unjust reason? Moreover, you plotted to take my husband's life and smear him as a criminal. For the sake of appearances, to hide your child's wrongdoing, you took the lives of two people for such a trivial reason. I can never forgive you. I wish for the death penalty.
After I shouted that, the courtroom fell silent. Riley and Silas were pale and trembling. Perhaps now, they've realized the magnitude of the crime they committed. But it's too late. Repenting after taking lives is meaningless, everything is too late. If possible, I want them to return the 2 lives they took. If that's impossible, I wish for Riley and Silas's lives to be the compensation. And then, the verdict was announced. As requested, the 2 were given the death penalty. To be honest, I felt somewhat relieved. It's uncertain when the sentence will be carried out. Riley and Silas will spend their days in fear until that day comes. Hannah and Mark will not return, but I hope they understand even a fraction of the fear they caused. For such trivial reasons, the two who were taken are truly pitiful. And there's another person involved in this incident. Jake. Though he wasn't directly involved in the act that took Hannah and Mark's lives, he did impregnate Hannah. The bodies have been cremated, so confirmation is impossible, but Jake confessed, and his parents' testimonies exist. However, Jake is still a minor, a grade schooler. Children under 14 cannot be penalized. Therefore, a notification was sent to Child Welfare Services, and he was placed in a care facility. Now, he's confronting his sins, crying in regret. He's still a child, but he hurt Hannah due to his desires and curiosity. I hope he never forgets that. And I wish for his sincere repentance. Afterward, I reported the trial's outcome at the graves of Hannah and Mark. Mark, your name has been cleared. Hannah. I'm sorry, I couldn't protect you. But they received the death penalty. It doesn't bring you back, but I've avenged you. So, please rest in peace. As I said this, the flowers I had just placed trembled a little. It might have been the wind. But it felt as if they were responding to me, and tears welled up in my eyes. Then, 20 years passed. Now, I live far away from that land, in a big city. Staying in a place filled with memories of Hannah and Mark was painful, but more than that, I grew tired of being in a land dominated by the wealthy. People chasing after appearances and clout, swarming around privileges. That very mentality was the reason why Hannah and Mark were taken from us. It seemed so pointless to me, and I found no reason to stay in such a corrupt place. Since then, I've been working and engaging in activities through a victims' rights organization. I organize lectures, propose places where victims can talk to each other, and much more. Helping me is Mia. Mia has become a university student, studying psychology. When she went to university, she started living alone in the city where I was, and began helping me with the activities. Mia was tormented by guilt for not having warned Hannah. But the fault lies entirely with Jake's family, not Mia. You don't have to worry, I've told her many times. And though it took time, she gradually began to move forward, showing me her bright smile again. Recently, the existence of our victims' rights organization has gradually become known, leading to more lectures, magazine, and TV appearances. We've become quite busy, but I've never forgotten about Hannah and Mark. I've thought about them countless times, if they were still alive. But each time, I devoted myself more to my activities. To support the many families of crime victims, to be of some use to them. That, I believe, is the best way to honor Hannah and Mark. As one left behind, I am determined to fulfill this mission. No matter what difficulties lie ahead, I intend to keep moving forward. Believing that Hannah and Mark are watching over us from heaven.